Hello everyone, Chris here, and thanks for tuning in. In this episode, we're chatting with maritime attorney Alison Cusack about her unique journey from engineering to law, tackling industry challenges as well as strategies for a more inclusive maritime world. Join us for insights, stories, and a bit on what's currently on Alison's bookshelf. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. You know, that helps us reach more listeners and keeps the conversation going. Now, on to the show. Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's podcast, our guest is Alison Cusack, principal lawyer for Cusack & Co. This is a new and latest episode of Tell Me More Tuesday, where we explore a specific topic within the maritime space beyond just what's going on with digitization. In the past, if you're new, we've discussed things like P&I clubs, what is a bill of lading, and why design is so important in shipping. Yes, that last one is very true. Today, we're joined by Alison to talk about her role as a maritime attorney, what she does on a day-to-day, and why you should use an attorney. We also talk about some of the changes in our space that are happening, maybe a little bit on the digital side and with world events around us. This is a great guest. I'm excited to have Alison. And it was actually an example of what is good with the internet. Somebody made us an introduction, I think, on what's formerly known as Twitter. And somebody said, Alison, have you heard of Chris's podcast? No, I haven't been invited. I said, you need to be invited because I enjoyed what else you were on. I forgot it was a podcast or an article, and I really enjoyed it. And I said, Alison needs to come on. So Alison, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to teach more people about maritime law and why, lawyers are their best friends at all times.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into shipping. Because I think, part of the reason for this Tell Me More Tuesday is to talk to people about these diverse backgrounds, about what they do, really for the folks who are in the industry or maybe thinking about getting an industry and they have no idea what a maritime attorney does. There's a lot of different angles, but so tell us about how you got started and kind of how you got into our little world here.
It's a little bit of a windy story. So I actually started off studying electrical engineering. So I'm one of the few lawyers who is just really, really into, mathematics. I love that. I love that. It's a secret weapon, less secret now that I keep telling everyone. But I have what's known as aphantasia. So I can't visually image anything, right? So it's just, you can visualize an apple. I visualize nothing. No spatial awareness, which is not really good for engineering. And I only found out about it way after the fact. So I switched into business, international trade, hilariously, and law. Because I was like, the law will make my business degree look a lot better and it'll set me apart. And then interestingly, I switched from international trade to banking and finance, which I find very, very funny, given where I am. So doing the law, doing business, fell in love with the law, first contracts class. What's a contract? Offer, acceptance, consideration. Boom, done. I can go out and use that. Great. It was so immediately usable compared to the, electrical engineering, where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I don't think you guys should trust me with designing anything because I don't feel real confident about this. So I went from being, really struggling in engineering to just thriving in law. They have what are called moots. So they're fake law courts, and you get to argue, and the little law students argue at each other. And I missed out on the premier moot that goes to Vienna. And I was like, and they said, listen, you still want to moot? And I was like, of course I do. I live for this stuff, because you got to pad out your CV so you can get your law job after school. And it was the International Maritime Arbitration Law moot. And I was like, done electrical engineering, or anyone who's done that, it's in the nano, right? It's 10 to the -9. You can't see it. It's mythical. You think the electrons are firing. You hope they are, and it's not a resistor burning. And then you go into shipping, and you're like, hang on a second. There's this gigantic ship that's crashed into a wharf. Collision, not collision.
Collision, yes. I had one of those.
The cargo spills out, and you're like, what's the loss and damage of this contract? And you just dramatically point to the broken containers, and you're like, that. And I was like, that was really, I wanted that. I was like, yes, I want to see the law in action, because a lot of law as well is kind of ethereal and mythical, the concept of money, the concept of currency, the concept of companies, the concept of IP. It's all a bit kind of, we all agreed together to believe in this concept. That's the only thing holding it up.
Right.
Whereas a ship, you can see a ship, you can see your cargo, you can see your cargo is damaged, you can see that container ship has broken up, hello MOL Comfort, you're like, oh look, the fleet expanded
Yep.
temporarily, not
Yep.
great. I was hooked from the get-go. So then part of the moot problem was general average. And that led me into doing my honors thesis on general average. So I am the other shipping lawyers in Australia are very happy for me to have the title. They've gifted it to me, Australia's general average nerd. They're like, no, we won't fight for you for it. You take it. You take it.
General average nerd. I love it. I love it.
I've even met the editor of the Lowndes and Rodolph book on York Antwerp rules in London. He caught the train down and he was discussing his book with me because like he edits it. He's like, oh, what do you think should be in the next edition? And I was like, oh my God.
It was
I
like
was like,
you
listen.
it was like if you're into like, Star Wars and you go to Comic-Con and sit next to Mark Hamill or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's like, oh my God.
That's
My law school library special ordered the book in. Like it's print on demand, this book, and it's still sitting in the library. And I was like, you reckon if I just borrowed it, anyone would notice?
that's
Like,
fantastic. So
no.
it's a real
So yeah,
passion, huh?
once I found out, I was hooked, and you could not sway me. I had lots of very well-meaning, like senior practitioners in Australian law going, Alison, look, you don't want to niche down so quickly, so hard. Like, just look around. And I was like, no, this is it. This is it. Then I went to the tax officer's grad because it was it's a global recession in '08, as you do. But yeah, then the general counsel for the Australian arm of the CMA CGM group was like, "Hey, are you still into shipping? Would you like a job?" And I was like, would I like to be headhunted for my first ever law job? Yes. So
Awesome.
did nearly 6 years there. And what I did was I just wanted to consume and learn as much as humanly possible. I'd go talk to the vessel planners, I'd talk to the ops team, I'd talk to the space coordinators, I'd talk to customer service, to docs. Like I was like, if you explain it to me properly once, then I can go away and do my job and I won't bother you again. And so I'd be sitting literally next to the planner at the desk talking through issues and stack collapses and, fuel issues, because so bunker fuel, if people don't know, when you put it on, you actually keep a sample and you go test it before you use that tank in case it's got problems. And it's bunker fuel. I mean, Singapore had a huge case, a year or two ago? Just hundreds of vessels being like, sorry.
And then
So,
before that, I think it was probably about 5 years ago, and it spread all over. It was the one in Houston and then they traded that fuel all over the world. And
yeah.
it was manufactured in Houston, and then ships basically switched into it, and then they broke down in the middle of the ocean. It was nuts. It was definitely before COVID. I'd say about 7 years ago or 6 years ago. And I know
Well, I
more
remember
recently
the
Singapore had something.
OW
Yeah.
OW bunkers was a whole
Oh, that was a disaster.
that was a
Yeah.
whole mess.
But
So
that was more on the who am I paying side, not
yeah,
even
that was the lawyers and the financiers like having
like
a whole living nightmare going, yeah, we like work, but this is this is it was like a Gordian knot type of style where like
yeah.
how you do on one thing and you get to the other side of the world. But yeah, so basically then nearly 6 years ago, so April will be 6 years, I wasn't going to advance where I was. And my old boss was fantastic. He said, listen, I'm a lifer. I'm here until I retire. If you want, and from the get-go, it's like, if you want to move up, you're going to have to move out. And none of the law firms would hire me because I didn't have law firm experience. And I was like, but I have heaps of like industry knowledge, operational. I've worked on stuff all over the world. And then I had this moment of like, I can't believe they don't want to hire me. I'd hire me. And then I went, yeah, they'll hire me. So I started my law firm from scratch, had a lot of people tell me there was not enough work in the industry in the small market of Australia, that it was already oversaturated. Like I didn't have enough people to like make it onto any of the panels for the insurers, P&I club. And I was like, listen, I'm just going to try this anyway. I'm going to back myself. And so nearly 6 years later, running my own internationally recognized law firm and get to have these great fun podcasts and go
I was
on
gonna
TV,
say, now
talk
you made it
about the
to
Suez Canal. Like
you made
I
it to
get
the
to,
big
I
time on a
get to,
podcast.
but I get to, I love shipping, and it was either start my firm or leave shipping, and
Yeah.
it means there was no choice.
Yeah,
Really?
that's fantastic. So explore with us a little bit about like your day to day. Where coming from the liner side, did you stick on the liner side and given kind of where Australia is and in the in the realm of shipping, I would imagine that's a big part of what you do. But talk a little bit about your day to day there.
So I switched sides, which
Ah.
was very dramatic because I'd been pure liner side, consortiums. I was queen of cartels. There wasn't a consortium that I hadn't drafted or filed. Like, I know how to make that legal, all of that. And I went, you know what? It was around the time CMA CGM had bought APL. And there was just this really less and less players in the top 10. And I thought, but there's a bunch of these shippers who are getting screwed over because they don't have the power play. They're not the Walmarts. They don't sort of have that market share. And I just was like, nah, someone's got to stick up for them. I don't like people winning. Winning because you're big isn't winning. Winning because you're good, that's where you want to be. So I was like, I'm just going to keep them honest, keep the bastards honest. So I switch sides, exclusively do cargo. I go after, so about 2 months after I finished up with my in-house job, I turned around and said, hey, can you release me from my conflict so that I can sue you?
That must have been a great phone call. That's a great,
Yeah,
great phone
so,
call.
no, my old boss and I get along because he trained me. He's like, I know you're good. I trained you. So he liked it because there's someone, it's not fun having a legal fight with someone who you got to educate on the
Yeah.
concepts before you can get them up to the like. It's
Yeah.
That's not fun. That's not it.
No, 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 not at
So
all.
I have a variety of things of people. I get a lot of LinkedIn DMs being like, "Hey, do you do you do this?" And I'm like, I do. And then I get other ones where I'm like, get a phone call like, "Oh, I've gotten your number from someone else." And it's like, okay, cool. They'll have a certain type of commodity that's been delayed, and genuinely have done this. I said, okay, is your cargo about to explode? Is your cargo? Are we facing like a Beirut situation? And he's like,
Yeah,
no, no,
yeah.
no, no, no. It's hygroscopic, not. And I was like, it's just gonna go clumpy. I was like, okay, but I genuinely have to ask clients like, will this explode? Will this what? And I'm thinking, and people think the law is boring. Do you get to ask if things explode in your day job? Come on.
Not anymore. As a shipbroker, I think we looked at it, but we talked before the podcast. I come from the wet side and the tank bulk. What Alison's talking about is completely on the container side, which is really, really interesting because it's the closest thing really to consumers, right? I mean, that's what you're dealing with one step away from the ship to a truck and then into a warehouse, someplace to be distributed.
I do distinctly remember there was a time there was an engine breakdown on a ship, and it was part of a three-phase trade swap. So it was causing all kinds of chaos. And it was about September, and I was like, "Hey, Mum, just look in your turkey for Christmas now.
Yeah,
I can't say anymore. I can't say anymore. Can't say
yeah,
anymore.
yeah. It's
I do my
crazy.
shopping. People ask why I always do my Christmas shopping so early. And I was like, listen, don't ask questions. Follow the lead.
Yeah, it's funny, and then and I think that talking about the day to day and things like that, and you kind of like segue into the hot topic, which is what's going on in the Suez Canal. And one of the things that the struggles with our industry in general is the fact that people don't understand it because as the things in the Suez Canal was starting to ramp up, people got nervous, like, well, I'm not going to get my Christmas stuff. We're like, I'm thinking,
It's
even I know this. I'm like, dude, you got that stuff like in August, bro. No,
I
no, it's not that. Like, worry
I
about
did
maybe
a
your
LinkedIn
bikini or something.
I did a LinkedIn post, and because I was so infuriated by these latecomer economists who bandwagon jumped on shipping as a cool hot topic. They're like, "Oh, is Christmas cancelled?" And I was like, "Christmas ships in September. We
Yeah,
are 2 weeks. We are like 10 days out from Christmas. You know
yeah.
what? That's not your Christmas cargo. I
Yeah,
can't
that's maybe like your bikinis or for summer or something that you want, whatever. But yeah,
And I was
that to me
But
is
I did, yeah. It infuriates me because, and I did a LinkedIn post about that saying, you're going to hear all these fun buzzwords, you're going to hear all these fun hot takes. And I said, no, here are three people that I think you should follow because they talk about this all year round. They
right.
know the nuances, they know the industry, and they're not just going to go, they're not going to try and approach a mayor of San Francisco to on a defunct Twitter account to
Yeah, yeah, no, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just that stuff is crazy because because let me ask you, like, so where you are in Australia, so from Australia, from what you're doing, what's going on in the Red Sea and all of that, is that a material impact, something that you deal with on the day to day? Are you starting to get clients who are nervous about that? What are you seeing on the day to day as a maritime lawyer for what's going on right now today? And by the way, I'm going to warn my guests, we recorded this in mid-January. We're going to drop this in February. Things may change, but for right now, mid-January, what are you seeing, and are you seeing things with your clients about this?
So the interesting thing is, I've always been pro tender contracts. I've always been about leveraging your really great relationships, your business relationships, your handshake deals, your I'll look after you, don't you worry, no, 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 no. As long as I'm here, I'll look after you, into ironclad contractual clauses. And those contractual clauses are, this is an all in rate. Don't worry about your GRIs. Don't worry about your peak season surcharges. Don't worry about any of that. Your guaranteed reefer surcharge at the start of COVID. Like plug availability is like subject to a surcharge. I don't think so. I've been pushing this. Last year, I was at a Chinese New Year function in Australia, and I said the next 6 months is the best time to lock in all your rates and all of your contractual great customer service. Take all the great customer service you'd ever want and put it into a contract. And I've done it for a decade. I know exactly how this works and how to get it real nice. And everyone goes, no, Alison, it's fine, don't worry. So the very weird thing about Australia, as an island nation who 97% of our goods come by sea, government wouldn't know that. Government doesn't see, government doesn't care. It's a real tragedy of the commons, because no one's port is really in, if we had like one huge port, right, that serviced the whole country, that's going to be in some elected representative's backyard, and they're going to leverage that. So for instance, we have like senators and stuff from the country, and they're like, my country, and they've got droughts, and they really push hard. But because the sea is everywhere as an island nation, it's fine. So actually what's been happening here is DP World's been in a industrial dispute with the Maritime Union of Australia, and they've been doing rolling stoppages, go slows, all those usual things. And so no one really thinks about the Red Sea. Everyone's thinking about, well, I just can't actually get my container. I can't run in my container. I can't pick up my container. It's costing $20 million a day in disputes. And everyone in the industry is like, can someone step in and make these guys come to the table or just get on with it? And everyone's like, like there's no general public aware what's happening. And so when you go back to the Red Sea, is that, so we had protesters here in Australia protesting Zim ships. In a Melbourne port and a Sydney port. They were protesting Zim ships because they were protesting Israeli, owned companies, thinking that they were moving munitions and blockading trucks. And I'm thinking, if you ever know how munitions are transported, it's not just by some rando truck without an escort.
Yeah.
And what they didn't know is that this Zim ship was on a trans-Tas service. It was going Australia, New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand. I'm like, this is not, and it was so infuriating as someone who knew that I was like, I'm not going to be able to educate. There's not enough base level education on how shipping works to then have that conversation without seeming like oh, you're on this side or you're on that side.
Right. Yeah. Especially around that. That's such a hot potato. Yeah. I recall years ago, a container ship hit a buttress of the Golden Gate Bridge. And this had to be at 08, 09. And because it was spilling oil from the bunker tank, I remember seeing a headline that said tanker runs aground in San Francisco. And I'm like, dude, that's like, it has containers on, like, and that was 10 years ago, and I remember seeing that over like 15 years ago at this point, and I remember seeing that, like, what are we doing here, folks? And we're not like you, we're not an island nation, but a lot of our trade, I mean, I don't have the trade numbers off the top of my head. Obviously, the U.S. is a huge importer and exporter of everything. We import more than we export, but we export a lot of oil these days. I mean, we have, and we, I think, have a very similar issue with
sea
Maritime is only,
blindness.
I think maritime is, yeah, important only to certain people. When what people have to remember, it's important to everybody. We have a big inland system as well that brings
Mm.
in grains and other things from the heartland, as we call it in the United States, down to the Mississippi and so on. And I think what people don't realize is how it's all connected and how we need to, figure that out. But so you guys, you're not maybe dealing a little less with the Red Sea and more with what's
Well,
going on with DP
we're
world, I guess.
we're going to be dealing with the Red Sea. It hasn't hit us yet because there's a lag. I would say that 20% of Australian trade is going to be going through the Red Sea, and it's more of our high value goods as opposed to like our run of the mill, just churn and burn factory, consumer
Right.
goods. And there's going to be a lag, but the problem is going to be is that I don't think governments can have a proper conversation talking about the importance of freedom of navigation. We have it more in the South China Sea with the 9-dash line, and people are like, oh, I kind of get it, I kind of don't, but mostly don't. And then it's the same type of issue in the Red Sea where it's freedom of navigation. All of our seafarers, and I say our seafarers because we should all be grateful to the seafarers that are transiting. And I don't want to play into the liners going, oh, it might have our ship's name on the side, but we contract out to a staff management company and they subcontract to something else. And so they're not really our seafarers. And I'm like, they're on your ships. As a lawyer, I'm saying don't play funny buggers on, technicalities,
Yeah.
right? I'm a huge proponent of seafarer welfare. I think if you go to work, you should come home and you should be safe at work.
Yeah.
And we've
Yeah.
got these seafarers going through the Red Sea, and we need every single seafarer we can get because we lost a bunch through to COVID. We lost a bunch with the Russian invasion of Ukraine because 15% of seafarers are either Russian or Ukrainian. And so they wanted to go home to fight, which you can understand, or you had to split up who was on what ships. But we've got these seafarers who no one is talking about. We're talking about missiles hitting ships and the ships being okay. And no one's going, okay, but we've got, you're happy to put 1,500 USD surcharge per box to transit the Red Sea so you can skip 6 days and a piracy surcharge around the Cape of Good Hope. But I'm sorry, I want to know exactly how much is going to the seafarers for
Yeah.
their war risk. And I want to tell people, start questioning those surcharges. Ask where it's going. I want to know, because if you are a seafarer and you've gone, all right, I can forgive COVID, barely. Okay, I wasn't really affected by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Okay. And you're like, oh, but you're just happy to send us through with missiles lobbing and going, you're fine. And still shorting you on provisions? Like,
Yeah, it's and you talk a little bit about something that comes up frequently on a podcast. I recorded something a couple of days ago where you talk a lot about the number of seafarers, and there is going to be, and I hate to use this word because I think it could be overused, this could be a crisis of well-trained
it,
seafarers, and not just,
it,
that affects, and I agree with you, it's our seafarers. I think the more we take kind of this ownership, if you buy anything that's not made in your backyard, it's our seafarers, because at some point it's going on a ship. And I think that's very important to consider.
the other thing that drives me nuts, and I do a lot of gender equity advocacy. I used to be president of like the Women in Shipping Association in Australia for 4 years and
Oh,
did a
Wista,
lot.
right?
Yeah,
Oh, you're
Worcester.
another Wista. All right. I think I have about 3 or 4, and I'm a Wista Mister. So yeah, I have about, I think
So
about
I was a
3 or 4.
Worcester. Yeah, I was a Worcester. I never know who knows Worcester and who doesn't. So that's why I sort of use
I
the.
think that a lot of
So
this
I
audience
was,
does. Yeah, I'll put it in the
okay, so
notes.
I was the Worcester Australia president from 2018 to 2022.
Okay.
And I was on the International Diversity Committee as well. So, and the International Nominations Committee looking after the executive nominations and stuff for the executive board. I've done a lot of education because everyone's like, oh, how do we solve the seafarer crisis? And I was like, listen, you're not going to believe it. There's a really, really, really simple solution. We are shutting out 50% of the talent pool. Oh my God, imagine if you could just increase the talent pool by 50%. We were up to 1.9% gender participation rate in seafarers before COVID. 97% of that was in the passenger and cruise passenger ferries,
Right.
right? We dropped back down to 1.2% after COVID. You want to get seafarers in, you need to just go get all the women, make it safe. And the thing is, it shouldn't affect it, but I think everyone's watching what's happening with the US Coast Guard and the fouled anchor congressional hearings to go, they're not doing it right. Oh, we got to, I think there's going to be a lot of
Yeah, and I think it leads me to the next question. Well, why come into this industry, and whether it's seafaring or what you do, like what is the benefit of coming in to our industry?
I love this industry, and I will always call out areas that I think we can do better. But I adore this industry because for me, it is multicultural. It shows what happens when nations work and lean and trade off each other. It's also shipping is the engine room of the world's economy. You know how the world's economy is tracking. You know how nations are tracking. You also get to see the impact of international politics. You get to see the impact of climate change, getting notifications that there's flooding in Durban, or there's, all these extra like typhoons happening in the Pacific, and then you're losing all these containers. Like, you get to see these micro moments of nations, for good or for bad, but you get to see all this. And then you get to see 180 something members of the IMO come together and try and go, right, we're all going to band together and try and fix this problem. Even though hilariously, every time they touch something, they make something else different.
Yeah. It's true, but I do.
Sulfur scrubbers.
Well, I do think if you want to listen to it, this is a plug. Last year, I spoke to a class a couple of years behind me at one of the maritime schools, Nick McCarr. Nick sits on on that committee for the scrubbers, and he is a representative for the Marshall Islands. I forgot exactly how his title is. I want to be careful, but you get the idea. And I asked him, I talked to him after MEPC 80, and I didn't want to talk about the rules and all that stuff. I wanted him to walk through us, like, how do you get, and I think this is an attractive part of the industry, all these different people who have to come together, and it was widely covered as much as it can be, right there. Forget about the rules. I know there's one reporter who also was on the podcast, Michelle Weesey Bachman's like, oh, they go into a room and we can't be there. And I love her commentary. She's a great reporter. She's been on the show here, and she's reporting other people, and the things are leaking out, and it's not going to work. It's going to work. It was. And I, talked to him about getting it done and getting something that most people were like, wow, that's pretty good. I said, how did you do that? And he talks about just sitting down and hashing it out and talking to people. And then you have a breakthrough. And it's a great listen. Forget about being on my podcast, but it goes to what you're talking about, Alison. And that is, you get to kind of affect change. You get to at least try to, right? I mean, we all try it and do it not only like, oh, I did it here in the US or in Australia or in Germany, but I did it 180 different conflicting, nobody was on the same page. You had people who had a lot of overlap, but not everybody. And that's really cool. I also think I had another guest a couple of months ago, Kyle Henderson of a company called Vision, and they do container tracking. And he said the reason, now he's not a maritime guy. He's a tech guy that comes in and doing it. And really great. He's had this great kind of idea. And what he said, Chris, what makes this industry so interesting is I can have a 1% increase in efficiency, and that is worth billions of dollars. He goes, if you have like Uber for dogs, and I joke around, I don't even know if there is Uber, if you make 1% change, maybe it's $1 million, maybe it's $2 million, whatever. This is billions and billions of dollars. Cause like you said, it's the global economy here.
It blows my mind that people don't understand the wealth and the opportunity in this industry, and how invisible and sea blindness is a term that's going to get more and more traction, is that I think it's like 12% of Australia's GDP, and you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't. From I've had people genuinely dead set say, no, it comes by air. And I said, oh, our washing machines come by. Yeah. And I was like, oh,
you know what I was
air freight.
You know what I was surprised at? You bring that up. That said that Apple's going to start moving their iPhones on ship. I was shocked. I was like, it wasn't that was my reaction. That was unbelievable.
I think everyone outside of shipping would have been like, oh, so sustainable. And everyone inside of shipping is like, you air freighting all of that?
Yeah, no wonder why my iPhone's so expensive.
Oh, I know. And by the way, Apple, if you're listening to this, I can get you some sweet tender contracts with those carriers. They would love to have exclusive Apple. Like I can listen. You can still get air freight for the price of shipping if I get my way. Yeah, but so something cool happened, and people go, "Oh my God, did you hear about this ship doing this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I heard about it a week ago."
Yeah. If something,
and they go, "Ships can catch fire."
Well,
I don't know how much to tell people, because they start getting more and more horrified. I'm like, listen, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry. Seafarers are all safe. It's fun.
Unfortunately, tragically, there was a big fire in the port of Newark during the summertime where I don't know if seafarers died, but firefighters died who came on Port of
Mm.
Newark fire. So yeah, people are like, wow, then it's like, was this an electric? Don't even get started about was this
Oh, the
an
EVs is a
EVs?
whole, oh, that's a whole nother. I mean, Selma Cogliano, I think like his head explodes when he's trying to explain to people because he's a firefighter and a former mariner,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah. He was
and
on the
he's
podcast too, man. Name dropping all my people. So yes,
yeah,
Sal is
I
very
know. I
good.
gotta know. Every time someone says I'm on a podcast, they go, "Who else should I get?" I'm like, "Okay, Brian Glick at Chain.io and like some Cogliano." Like, oh, they've already been on the
Yeah,
podcast, and
Sal
I'm
is
like,
Sal is
literally,
Sal Sal is excellent, and he's definitely one of the people you were probably referring to before that I watch and I look at, and I'll be honest with you, there's some things I go, maybe I don't 100% agree, but it's more like on the nuance thing,
yeah,
like
no,
there's some
and that's the
nuance.
thing, right? Like, I'm never going to agree, especially because I come from a legal background and I understand how consortia and cartels work, and I've got a really
Yeah,
specific
yeah,
take on when and how I think consortia should be permitted. Which I will have anyone who's listening, I will go on a podcast and explain in depth about the economic levers on that and the legal levers, and that's fine because that's my wheelhouse. I'm like, it's not about agreeing with them 100%. It's about if listen, 90 to 95% of what they're saying is on the money and it's factual and it's got the necessary background. I want people listening to Sell every day of the week over some random economist who's gotten the shipping
yeah,
big this week.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
just that's just my thing.
Yeah, Sal is very good. There's a couple of folks I
I was
can't think
also
of.
on Sal's YouTube, so you know,
Oh,
your
I
scans are
haven't,
high.
I haven't made his YouTube yet. He was on my show, but I haven't, I'm not that cool yet. But
This
that's all
is this
right.
is a Sal fan club session now.
Yeah, it is. I'll make sure I mention. Maybe we pick up a couple extra listens. Just want to go back a little bit, as we talk about this, and because I do like the topic. You talk about women and equity. Can we do anything? I mean, there's been a lot of stuff, like you said, eyes on the Coast Guard. In the U.S., there was a big case with Cadet X and things like that. What can we do here?
Probably going to be an unpopular opinion or unpopular hot take, as the TikTok Gen Zs would say. I want to see men calling out men. If a man is in a position of power, or he has a high profile office or whatever, I want to see him calling that out. I want to see him say, "Yep, you know what? That's not good enough." I don't need it to be a huge song and dance. Just be like, "Listen, no, we're not doing that anymore. Should never have done it, and we're definitely not doing it anymore. And I've given you enough time to self-correct on your own. You didn't take it. I'm going to call it out." And I mean it at networking events. I have been in the industry since 2012, and I go to a lot of networking events. I'll go into a room and I'll know 200 people easy. I have never once seen another man correct a man who's made a joke at my expense. My personal experience, I've never seen anyone go, "Oi, come on, what was that?"
I will have to say I agree, and I think that's probably a very effective and powerful way to.
And I don't need it to be a big song and dance. I just need to be like, "Oi, what was that?" No, cut it out.
Yeah.
Right? Because men respond to other men, and I've gone toe to toe with nearly every senior male industry, figure in the defense, government, private sector in Australia, right? I could give you a whole host of names. It'd be very funny. And people go, "Why did you bother?" And I'll do it. Like if they started, I'll finish it, is my philosophy, right? If they're willing to say something completely out of pocket in public, I will call them on it in public because, right, they set the ground rules. And someone will say to me afterwards, "Why did you bother? You know they're not going to change their mind." So I didn't do it for them. Did it for everyone listening in.
Yeah,
On
exactly.
conversation. And I will also hold people, if you're going to shout your values from your website and in your speeches and go, "Oh, look at me, I picked up this little award because we're so for equity, because look at our values," and then you don't live that, I will always hold you to the values you offered up. Like if you say, "Listen, and I don't care about anyone and I hate everyone," I'm like, "Listen, you're living your truth." If you say, "I'm for gender equity and we care about this and we care about that," I'm going to go, "All right, that piece of action wasn't. What are you going to do about that?" And they're like, "Oh," and I said, hey, I never asked you to say that. You want the credit, you want the nice ticks and the accolades and the little awards. Oh, look at me. then I'm going to hold you to that standard because, hey, you're the ones talking about merit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a lot of thought about that. But that's we could go on for another hour, and we're getting up
We've
near our
planned
time.
our next 5 episodes.
We have, and I'll get on some other people on the show to talk about this. But as we wrap up here, and I love this was a wide ranging conversation beyond just lawyers and legal stuff. I really appreciate getting kind of that view as well. So I ask this question on every podcast. I get a lot of, I do get different answers, and that is, what are you reading? And some people will say to me, well, listen, Chris, I have 3 kids. I can't read anything. I listen to podcasts. I hope they listen to mine, or I listen to audiobooks or I've actually had some people tell me, Chris, I am writing a book. Had a few people say they're writing books. Kind of interesting. So what is on your nightstand? What do you throw in the bag if you go on a business trip or a personal trip? What's because it's in summer down there, maybe you're heading to the beach. What are you reading right now?
Just a little plug for my book. I did write a book last year. It's on Amazon, self-published. It's for the newbies in the industry who don't have a background and want to know the lay of the land. You can get it on Kindle Unlimited. Don't spend your money. It's fine. I just want to
Nice.
be the British passenger train books that are in my category. I'm getting outgunned by British passenger train books. Come on, people. I need the industry to rally behind me. I am actually in the middle of Atomic Habits.
Oh, I read that. Yeah, I read that.
Everyone is like, you got to read it. You got to read it. And I was like, I just don't believe everyone's hyping it up. Anyway, I was like, I've got the Spotify, and it's the first audiobook I've ever listened to. I love to read words, and I read incredibly. I naturally speed read, and I think it's because I don't visualize anything.
Right.
So
Okay.
anyway,
That makes
the
sense.
audio. It's summer. I was on holidays, going for walks around the neighborhood, and I was like, oh, I've got Spotify. I've got Atomic Habits is free, right? As an audiobook. Give it a listen. Okay, no one warned me that the first chapter is just unhinged. Like, I was not for the backstory. I was like, oh my God, this is insane. Anyways, once you get past that, I am really loving it. And I think it's because I'm in the right headspace and mindset to go, yes, I want this. I wouldn't read it if you're like, I don't know, maybe something. But if you're like yearning, if you're like, I want to get to the next level of whatever it is, maybe not work, just in life, you feel that kind of slight unsettled.
Right.
I love Atomic Habits. And then for the lady listeners, because this is a book, I would definitely recommend the book Burnout. It's about how women, it's written by 2 sisters, one's a psychologist, and it actually is the first book I've ever seen talking about how the patriarchy fits in to everything else that happens, and it really acknowledges that. Like, I found it fantastic. Like, I put into practice something that was in the first 10 pages. I was like, yes, I love this. This makes me feel seen. Men can read it too, not saying that, but it's the first book I've seen that really talks about that kind of invisible aspect and how it impacts on things. But Atomic Habits has blown my mind. I haven't even finished it because I'm listening to about 20 minutes a day so that I can just like noodle on it and think on it. I'm gonna, instead of finishing a book and going, I won't implement a single thing of that. If you're really getting antsy for the next level and you're like, I just feel like there's another gear in me, that's when I would read Atomic Habits is mine.
Excellent. I read it a few years ago. Now you got me curious about going back to the first chapter. I'm reading, and I mentioned this before, I'm trying to finish up, is I think Next Level, but in a different view, is the book by the record producer Rick Rubin. It's called like The Art of the Creative, because this is my creative outlet, right? And it's interesting because I went to a maritime school, like I've said now a couple of times, right? You're not taking art classes, you're not taking basket weaving. I'm not offending anybody. You're not taking sculpting, right? You're doing maritime stuff, and you're doing navigation, and if you're engineering, you're studying engineering. And this really gets you. And I started the podcast, I'm like, oh, I like people. I'm going to try this. I've had this in the back of my head, but talk about the creative process, talk about doing things, talk about pushing things, talk about creating not for an audience, but for yourself. Like, I like talking to people, and who do I like to talk to? That's who you should. So I've been putting it in that, and I've been reading like 20, 30 minutes and then stopping and thinking about it, and then getting ideas, not necessarily how to recreate, because it doesn't talk about that, but it talks about things like being aware, paying attention, being in the moment, these sort of things, creating not for an audience. Not, like that's why blockbusters, especially sequels, never work, because you're trying to recreate what the original was, like Star Wars, right? I'm a big Star Wars fan. You could argue number 2 is better, like, but the original, they realize, well, we have this fandom, so we have to recreate that. No, and that's why some of the newer TV shows maybe are getting really high praise, because it's from fans who are making it for themselves, but they had to become fans. So it's an interesting way of thinking about it. It's something that, it's a little more tangential, not day to day, but I do think about it. Alison, this was supposed to be a 20-25 minute chat, turned in a heck of a lot more, which is fantastic. I think you may have set the record as the first person where I would have to bleep out a word, because I filed this under Apple as safe for work. I may have to bleep that out. Maybe I'll put in a funny little like a ship horn. That's what I'll do. Even though the word wasn't that bad, I may have to do that because it is family safe. Alison, this was fantastic. I wish you the best of luck in your private practice there, and maybe we'll hit a reset button in a year or two and have you come back on. We can talk more about these topics. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.